The cultural Marxists are a version of the CCP, the way that they can cancel you, take away your bank account, punish you. I lost 200,000 subscribers on YouTube because Google found me unorthodox. So I would say the left is the theocracy we have to worry about. They're crazy. What I love about them is it wouldn't be bad if they were criticizing what I actually said, but they make up stuff you never said. And that's the part that to me is fascinating.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Olivia Brown. This is WJ Now. And today we have a very special guest, Lance Wallnau, who is an author, evangelist, and the host of the Lance Wallnau Show. Welcome, Lance.
It's good to see you, Olivia.
So, you've been the talk of the town recently after Rolling Stone put a hit piece out about you. So, you know, when lefties are complaining, you know you're doing something right. Don't you agree?
Well, that's what we say to ourselves anyway when we get the press. You know, what was worse than that is I was before Rolling Stone, I had 3.5 million views on Twitter because I showed up at Doug Mastriano's event I'm from Pennsylvania, and I was encouraging all my friends in Pennsylvania to get behind him. And I shared with them the story of Gettysburg and how it was a colonel on a lonely mountain called Little Round Top that saved the Union by, when they ran out of bullets, they fixed bayonets and they moved as one man down the mountain and swept the mountain, and they held the position on the second day. And when I said as one, the left grabbed it and said, this guy did a Nazi salute at the Doug Mastriano event. 3.5 million zealous leftists took it on Twitter and said, Nazi salute. And then they listen to the soundtrack and they find out I'm talking about Gettysburg moving as one. And it doesn't matter. I mean, these guys are crazy. So then Rolling Stone follows that, and then the Inquirer, Bucks County, Philadelphia Inquirer, they're crazy. What I love about them is it wouldn't be bad if they were criticizing what I actually said, but they make up stuff you never said. And that's the part that to me is fascinating.
They love to call us Nazis at every chance that they can get. What was the biggest accusations that you saw which were fake in that Rolling Stone article?
Well, the part that to me is obviously fake is that I have a Jewish background. So when you got somebody with a Jewish background doing a Nazi salute, you're especially reaching. But so the Rolling Stone article is fascinating. It was poorly written, but they didn't stop them from writing it anyway. I mean, you guys at least do journalism and your punctuation's correct. I mean, I couldn't even get a proper punctuation on how they wrote the article. The weirdest part was they put quotations around stuff like, he's called the father of modern American dominionism. And they never quote who quoted it. It was probably some guy, near the water fountain that they were quoting. But anyway, the quote is, the father of modern dominionism. So that would be the first one. Then, of course, they're always trying to throw Christian nationalists in there because they love to stoke some kind of weird panic attack, tying it into January 6th. But it's also contrived and bizarre, especially for those of us that are evangelical. It's like, what the heck are they talking about? It's entertaining if you don't take it too personal.
Definitely. And they also talked about theocracy. And I listened to your podcast. It was great. You said that theocracy has more to do with Islam and the CCP than actually what you believe as a Christian. Can you explain that for our viewers?
Oh, sure. So the idea of a theocracy is you have God, like take radical Islam. You have God and his laws ruling over government and culture. And what I've taught for 20 years is 7 mountains of culture shape society, and that it's and whatever the prevailing ideology is in the culture, it ends up becoming the new sacred within the culture, that which cannot be questioned, that which is presumed to be true. Christianity, up until the last 25 or 30 years, was the prevailing sentiment we had as a glue that held our nation together, which is loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. That's not a very threatening worldview, but we never really had a vision, nor do I recommend we have a vision, where the clergy are running the 7 mountains. What we want are Christians with Christian values permeating culture so that we have civility, tolerance, and respect for one another dominating the culture. The left is a lot like the CCP. In my opinion, the modern progressive left is the cultural Marxists are a version of the CCP, the way that they can cancel you, take away your bank account, punish you, shut down your business. I lost 200,000 subscribers on YouTube because Google found me unorthodox. That means they have a new sacred, a new religion, and a new blasphemy laws that if you violate them, they feel morally justified in expunging you. So I would say the left is the theocracy we have to worry about. Christianity never had a view for taking over nations by imposing clergy on culture.
You mentioned YouTube canceling you. That was something I was going to ask about. And what have you learned from that circumstance after they canceled you and you lost all the subscribers?
Well, here's what I learned. I learned that if you don't want to talk about election fraud, January 6th, the insurrection, the government's irresponsibility and manipulation of that event, if you don't want to talk about vaccines and their danger or their origin or the absence of proper documentation from pharmaceutical companies, if you don't want to talk about any of those subjects, you can survive on YouTube. The problem is, if you're a news commentator or a current events analyst, which is what I do, then if you can't talk about the elections, you can't talk about COVID, and you can't talk about current events, it's going to really limit how relevant you are. And there's only so much you could talk about skirting around the obvious. They're going to punish you for that. And what they did, it was interesting, Olivia, is they couldn't find anything contemporary, so they put their bots to work going back a year ago, a year and a half ago. So when you have these new blasphemy laws, they're going to find something you said to cancel you from like 3 years ago if they could do that. And so, sure enough, they could find the justification for eliminating me.
We see that every time that we do the podcast. I remember we did an interview with Mike Lindell, and that was one of our lowest seen ones because it was so demonetized, and we're seeing that over and over again. And it's really sad to see that, but we're continuing to put the truth out. I had a question for you. Do you think that this is religious discrimination, what the Rolling Stone and these other mass media fake news are trying to say about Christians?
I think we're gradually coming to the realization in America that there is a new civic religion, and it's the critical race theory. Of course, if your listeners are probably familiar with the ESG, environmental and social governance, the new laws of political correctness or woke theology that's getting into government and business, so that if you don't subscribe to their environmentalist worldview, their idea of discriminated transgenders and gays and minorities on your board, they're trying to make sure that you have to represent all of their constituents in your government and the governance of your organization. They're actually meddling with capitalism and screwing it up and trying to take it over in a way that even the CCP doesn't do, because the CCP is at least sensible enough to know they want to be competitive, smart, and the best at what they do, conquering countries. You go woke and you end up putting incompetent people on a board simply to match a demographic demand by the woke left. You're killing your competitive capacity to even get a return on investment. So yeah, this is a religion taking over America, and I think the church is just waking up to the fact, barely, that we're up against a secular religion that is competing with the historic religion of Muslims and Jews and Christians in America. You got the Muslim, it's interesting, 500 Muslim men spoke up in Dearborn, Michigan last week at a school board meeting and faced down the school board. Now, that's curious. You have Muslim fathers that are taking a stronger stand, frankly, than Christian fathers, because they're saying, we're not going to have you messing up. We could tolerate America. If somebody wants to be homosexual, let them be. But do not tell me that you're going to be educating my children contrary to my values and alienating them from their fathers and mothers. Boom. That's the Muslim community.
I saw that. So there's been a spirit of mass deception across America. How can we combat that?
Become familiar with it. For instance, it was Dr. Malone, right? Dr. Malone, who is the mRNA vaccine researcher, who started doing whistleblowing on the use of his technology and the poor and incompetent way in which the research was done and its crossover into a vaccination that almost killed him when he took it. And so he went on the warpath to say, why is it that our elites are buying in to this whole pharmaceutical revolution when it's even putting children and people at risk? And he discovered the term mass formation, what is it called? It's mass formation psychosis. And Tucker Carlson did an interview on the researcher, a professor in Europe, who did the data analysis on mass formation psychosis, which is when people are in stress and anxiety, as can happen with a word about a plague.
Yeah.
And the fear causes them to be vulnerable to narratives. And they're so desperate to have confidence and faith that they can get out of it that they subscribe to whatever the dominant science and government narrative is. And this professor used data to show how the people that are the most vulnerable are the elites within academic communities. They end up falling prey to mass formation psychoses. This is the professor doing the data that Dr. Malone revealed.
The biggest deceptions that I've seen is the trans movement and the abortion movement. Just today, Stacey Abrams said that a way that we can stop inflation is through abortion. What is your response to that?
It's kind of, isn't it strange that I think the statistics are that 13% of the United States is the African American community. Half of that would be the female. 6.5% of Americans are the female population, and they're responsible for some 40% of the abortions. So Stacey Abrams is actually enthusiastic about the destruction of 40% of the African American children that are yet in their mother's wombs. Consider the insanity of that proposition.
I know we're seeing now in New York that more babies are being aborted than being born there, which is a reason that Christians should be involved. So a lot of pastors say that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. What does the Bible actually say about that?
Well, the Bible says that the cowards shall have their part in the lake of fire. That's an interesting verse that most pastors don't meditate or teach on. The reality is these pastors are worried about getting involved with issues that will be controversial and cause them to lose market share. It's a form of the highest degree of irresponsibility and selfishness. We were just with Eric Bataxis a week ago, and he has a new book, which is, I guess, Letters to America from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. There's your pastor giving you a perspective of if you do not deal with totalitarian fascism and authoritarian government coming in through socialists, like the National Socialist Party, which is where Hitler came from, then the church itself will end up becoming the target of the socialist intolerance. These pastors are aiding and abetting the destruction of America because of their selfishness regarding avoiding conflict and their cowardice regarding facing the reproach of the community because they're taking a stand on biblical morality. Forget about your current cultural issues. It's like Charlie Kirk says, all right, you don't want to talk politics? Do you still talk the Bible? Is that still relevant? Talk morality.
The best thing about the Bible, that it is as relevant as it was thousands of years ago as it is now. How can Christians be effective in politics?
Well, I think the way that Christians become effective in politics is by reorganizing. So what you're seeing now is a mass reformation, which is called a reformation. In the body of Christ. You're seeing that it's the grassroots, mothers and fathers and Christians that are working around the structures, frequently the impediment of their local church, to mobilize at the school board level, to mobilize at the precinct level. And this is why I think Steve Bannon has accurately predicted that what you see in Italy with the emergence of their new prime minister, and what you're looking at in Europe, in Hungary, and in Poland, is that the populace is saying we want God and family and cultural boundaries, including national boundaries, to stay intact, and they're pushing back on the spirit of globalist empire building, which basically in Europe wants to impose CRT and transgender values across the board on all cultures, basically changing the culture by this kind of, and the environmentalists are included in that mix. And the people are pushing back. They're finding themselves that the only way you could do it is governmentally, because government is becoming the legislative and the litigating power that is shutting down people along with the corporations. And it's hitting a backlash. It's going to hit it in the midterms here. It's hitting it in Europe. We look at Europe as though it's disconnected. Europe is the canary in the coal mine. It's typically a year ahead of us. Brexit hits there, and Trump shows up here. So keep your eye on Europe. You're beginning to see, and what Bannon said is interesting. He said, trust me, within a year, they're going to start calling it Christian nationalism in Europe, and they'll start attacking it in the United States after the midterms, because they're going to see that the Christians are reorganizing around the ecclesiastic barriers.
Trump really awakened that populist movement. What do you think we're going to see in the midterms and after the midterms?
Well, there's always the anxiety of the October surprise, they call it. You never know what can happen. You get, even with the mismanagement of the Russia-Ukraine situation, at any moment, something dangerous can develop that would be an interruption, a disruption, a news cycle, distraction. But I think in spite of it all, the American people are overwhelmingly, and particularly the Hispanic community, are overwhelmingly mobilizing themselves in the direction of rejecting the bizarre, eccentric governmental policies of the elites on the coast and demanding transformation in their own backyard. You're going to see states that are going to have some real powerful transformation coming out of the midterm.
You are working on a lot besides just being a business consultant and hosting the Lance Wallnau Show. Can you tell us a little bit more about your ministries?
Well, sure. What we're doing is we're really helping to mobilize that populist element so that it can become more congruent in terms of its voice. And part of what we're doing is we're noticing the hundreds of mother organizations and moms leading organizations, school board organizations, and precinct organizations, everywhere where you're seeing believers that are coming together and finding common ground, even just with the ordinary citizens that don't share their same religious worldview, but share a concern for America. We are promoting those groups. There are hundreds of these underfunded, courageous, self-organizing units that are showing up like ants at a picnic. They're all over the place. And now it's time for us to begin to build the ant colony and start uniting them together, providing coordination, getting funding to them, and identifying who are the emerging spokesmen and women for the reforms that America needs for us to survive.
Where can we find you on the Lance Wallnau Show? I know you're on our sister company, Liftable TV. Where else, since you are off YouTube now, can people view you, and can they contribute to your ministries?
I so appreciate you saying that. Yeah, so if and especially with my older demographic, I have to kind of like take them and show them. You got to get the podcast app. Download the app. Put in Lance Wallnau, Wallnau, pronounced Wallnau, like build the wall now. And you put it in there. We're doing like 800,000 or so downloads a month, and that's without any marketing. So there's an audience out there for truth, for prophetic discourse, which is predictive. We could see trends, we could discern direction, we can anticipate where the battle's forming. Lance Wallnau on Facebook, if I'm not terribly suppressed, we have like around 900,000 people there, though I'm getting hit there all the time, and I'm watching cautiously what's going on there. But you can find me on Instagram, on Getter, and on all of the platforms that conservatives have had to flee to for their own survival.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a great time chatting with you, and keep on fighting.
Thank you, Olivia. Keep on doing the great work you guys are doing at Western Journal. One of my favorite sources for news, one of my favorite partners to work with. Hope to do some more of this in the future.
Make sure that you stay tuned so that we have more great interviews just like we had with Lance Wallnau. We are here Monday and Wednesday. And you can check us out on our social media as well, WJ Live Podcast on Instagram and West Journalism on Twitter. Thanks, and see you again.